So everyone, I will start now. We have over 150 subscriptions, so I think a number of people will join in. May I kindly ask everyone to keep their camera off, if not presenting themselves, and in order to focus the attention on the speaker and on the slides. Thank you very much. My name is Stéphane Voisin. I am at Institut Louis Bachelier in charge of the Green and Sustainable Finance Research Program together with Peter Tankoff. And our objective today is to present one of the key stream of work of the Institut Louis Bachelier Green Finance project and program, which is data and sustainability data, ESG data. The other stream, as you know, being ESG risk analysis and impact measurements. So today the focus is on data. I thank you very much. I thank you very much the European Commission and especially Simon and Daniele to have agreed to come and speak to you and present the European data strategy. I think it's a key development at the European Union level. The reason why we wanted this to be done is we've been talking to a number of data specialists, and we were surprised to see how many people, even some data experts, were not aware or fully aware of what's cooking at the EU level, which is absolutely amazing in my view. And we very much thanks Daniele and Simon for this outreach session. Then we will continue with a presentation of the latest NGFS report on bridging the data gap. Thank you, Fabio, for that. Please keep your mic off. And Miriam, can we have a binding mic off from the audience, please? Thank you. And also, I will repeat that, keep your video off, please, and except for the speaker. Thank you very much. And I would say thank you very much, Fabio, from the IMF and co-chair of the NGFS data workstream to present this report. And then we'll have a very interesting lineup of speakers in a panel debate, and I'll come back to that afterwards. But I think with no further ado, I want to leave the floor to Simon and Daniele on that presentation. We have the time is short, so they will develop a presentation, and we will have some time for Q&A session afterwards. Simon, the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us to share a couple of remarks about the data strategy of the EU and where we stand in its implementation. I will present a couple of slides just as background to what I'll be speaking about. And if that's possible, I will just point for the next slide to be changed. So exactly, I'm just once again, my name is Szymon Lewandowski. I work for DG Connect. So the Director General, which stands for the Communication Networks, Content and Technology. We are the service of the European Commission that is responsible for designing and implementing various digital policies, including the policy and legislation on data, on all sorts of data, apart from personal data. This is handled elsewhere. But in any case, I'm very happy here to say a couple of words about how we think our strategy can help, I would say, build a more sustainable future. So, as you may know, the green and the digital policies are really the sort of flagship initiatives of this particular commission. And there were two major policy documents which are adopted at the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020. The first one of which is the European Green Deal, which sets out a strategy over the whole term of the Commission of how to basically counteract climate change, how to become more sustainable, how to make Europe more green and more efficient. And already then this document puts emphasis on data as one of the resources that could be used in a better way, that could be used more efficiently for the specific purposes of the Green Deal. And on the other hand, we have the European Data Strategy from February 2020, which also establishes the link to the Green Deal and notably commits to the building up of a Green Deal data space. And my colleague Daniela will later on explain more in detail what these data spaces, or what a European data space in general, might mean. Now, we see this as a sort of twin transition, in the sense that both these policies fit together and reinforce each other. And this is also reflected in the big financial package that the Commission has put forward in response to the COVID crisis, so the Recovery and Resilience Facility, in which specific portions of the funding are actually meant to be spent on digital transition and climate investments and reforms. Next slide, please. So the benefits of data for sustainability, the benefits for, I would say, environmental policies also in general are well known. We can use data to better adapt to climate change. We can use data by gaining new insights from the data, such as disaster risk data, to basically counteract and to planify for any future climate-related or environmental-related disasters. So this is why we need also a lot of access to, or wider access to, data coming from different kind of sources, both public and private. For the circular economy, it's quite clear, if you want to go ahead with projects such as digital product passports and so on, the information must flow between companies. Information about different products, about different work processes, has to be more widely exploited for us to be able to make our processes and products more efficient, generate less waste, and consume less energy. So there's a lot of benefit, and these are just a few benefits that we know of currently, but of course the data economy has the specific feature that many of the uses of data and ways of exploiting it, and many of the insights that can be derived from the data are just simply currently not known. And this is the great thing about data innovation, that you can generate uses as we move forward. Next slide, please. So the strategy for data is, as I said, a kind of a policy commitment by the EU, where we say, where we commit, where we promise that within the next couple of years we are going to reinforce and create what we call a European data space. And that data space is based on a couple of pillars, we might say, or it needs certain elements for the data space to function. So firstly, the data needs to flow across sectors and across the member states. This is a typical EU challenge that we have to make sure that as we have a single market, not only people, not only goods, not only services, but also data need to flow. And for that, we have adopted the free flow of data regulation. Then we also have to make sure that as data is being used, and obviously a lot of that data is data that we generate ourselves, or is the data that says something about us and about our behavior, personal data. We have to make sure that European values and actually fundamental rights are fully respected. And for that, we have the General Data Protection Regulation, which I think is by now already quite well known. But in addition to this, we need to fulfill a few more conditions, and one of them is that basically we need to have high quality data available to access and available for use and further reuse in the economy. And this is something that we are currently addressing via our current initiatives, because the fact is that we may think we are inundated with data, but a lot of that data is not actually readily usable and is not of high quality. So we are working on making sure that there is a wide enough pool of data to be able to actually do something useful with it. And secondly, we need to put in place some rules for what we can call data governance, basically to make sure that the way that the data is used, both by businesses and governments and by individuals, is actually fair and balanced, and that the rules that we are exposed to are clear and practicable. Because one of the big bottlenecks that we see now is that there is certain legal or there's legal uncertainty about what data can be used and how, under which conditions, and we think that there is room for improvement here. And we hear complaints from companies, we hear complaints from different organizations that some more order should be put there, some kind of a basic horizontal level for fairness in data sharing to enable the development of the data economy. And all that we do because we think it's a really a good moment for that, because we are expecting a really big wave of what we call industrial data. So the first big wave that enabled data innovation in the world happened on top of personal data and all the Googles, Facebooks of this world. But now we are seeing that as the industry, as the business world is using more and more data generating devices and data generating services, we will have a lot of very valuable data, and we have to make sure that we can exploit it better than we did last time, because Europe has sort of lost the digital race when it comes to personal data. But now we have a good opportunity
Vous avez
to do
été mis en
something,
attente. Ne quittez pas.
something useful
Votre
with
correspondant va vous
this
reprendre.
new wave of industrial data. Next slide, please. So the strategy is deployed, let's say, through 4 pillars. You can say 4 ways of approaching it. As every European strategy, it's a mix of legislation, mix of funding, mix of support and policy, and support to different sorts of collaboration, public and private, etc. Here we, of course, have a cross-sectoral governance framework for data access and use. So that's where most of the legislation is going to look at. I will mention that in a moment. We have the enablers. So we have a substantial funding foreseen for what we call this high impact project on European data spaces, as well as into the infrastructure that it's going to provide the technical basis for the data to be exchanged and exploited. Of course, we need more competences. This is one of the big problems in Europe, that in general, I would say data awareness and data skills are low. And so a lot of money is going to be poured into different support measures on the local or member state level to support digital skills and data literacy. And then starting from next year, we are going to, in practice, roll out those common European data spaces on a sectoral level, because we think that the most efficient way to actually build up the data economy is from the sectoral level. And that is something that's going to happen quite soon, and it will involve all kinds of stakeholders building what we call common European data spaces. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned the approach at the previous slide, that there is an important part of the data strategy activities in the form of legislative instruments. So basically, the Commission puts forward proposals for legislation, and then this is discussed among the member states and with the European Parliament. And so far, in the implementation of the data strategy, we have already put forward two important proposals. One is the Data Governance Act, so the proposal for European Data Governance Regulation. And the main objective of this piece of legislation is to ensure trust in data transactions. So the main element of that particular proposal is the setting up of what we call European-style data intermediaries. So basically entities whose role would be to make sure that the data supply and the data demand will match in the market. And at the same time, the kind of data intermediary that does not exploit the data for its own benefit. So a completely different kind of model that we currently have in entities such as Amazon, for instance, that of course collects and aggregates a lot of data, but at the same time uses the data of its customers to, in various cases, compete with them. So this is something that we want to decouple, and we really put emphasis on having a pure data intermediary function in the European markets. Then we have the Digital Market Act. That specific piece of legislation is looking at what we call data gatekeepers. So these large platforms that have acquired a position which allows them to dictate rules for smaller entities. And this new legislation tries to put a bit more of, let's say, different actors that exchange data on a more equal footing vis-a-vis those great digital platforms. Now, the two pieces of legislation which are still in the making is the Implementing Act with a list of high-value datasets. That is an implementing act based on an Open Data Directive. Open Data Directive is what was previously called Public Sector Information Directive. It's a directive which dates back to 2003, so it's a well-established piece of legislation. It is about opening up of public sector resources. So this is the part, I would say, of the strategy that looks at unleashing the power of public sector data. And we are currently working, I think, within a couple of months, we'll be able to adopt a regulation with a list of those high-value datasets. I'll mention in a moment what this actually is. And the Data Act is the last big chunk of legislation we're currently working on, the main objective of which is to ensure fairness in, let's say, the allocation of value from data across the data economy. So looking at fairness in contracts, looking at situations where enhanced data access is needed to ensure that, for instance, downstream markets, so aftermarkets, such as repair and maintenance markets, can thrive, and that there is some competition in them, which in various cases can only happen if entities that provide maintenance and repair services have access to the data generated by the devices in the main market. The classic example here is the car, where you have a lot of business activities which could flourish. However, most of the data is tightly controlled by the car manufacturers. So we're looking at situations where we could kind of put this balance right and open up a bit the access to such data. Next slide, please. Now, I already mentioned a couple of times, data governance, all these actions, both legislative and non-legislative, they basically aim at improving data governance, because what we see is that there's a lot of data which is not being used. It's out there, it's being compiled, it's being stored, it generates waste, it generates resources, but it's not being used. We see there's a lot of data analytics being deployed just to, let's say, clean the data, to make it usable. All this, of course, is not very efficient, and all this is not sustainable. So we think that having a better mechanisms, more secure, more sustainable, more trustworthy to exchange data, both on a legal and I would say technological levels, will certainly contribute to higher sustainability of the data economy. Next slide, please. And I would like to mention the Implementing Act with a list of high-value datasets, because I think this is one piece of legislation within the whole data strategy plan, which has a very direct link to sustainability. It has a very direct link to climate, environmental issues. Why? Because here we are talking about a piece of legislation which is going to enumerate a range of data sets which will then have to be made open. And by that, I mean they will have to be free of charge, they will have to be available via application programming interfaces, and they will be machine readable. So the kind of data which can be almost instantly used within a digital service or used to create a digital product. Its licensing will also be open, so it's going to be open for everyone, for big and small companies alike, for researchers, anyone. And the data sets are going to be chosen from among 6 thematic domains. And these thematic domains, I think all of them, but certainly most of them, have a very clear sustainability angle, or we can already think how they could be used to enhance sustainability. And that's because they contain a lot of geospatial data. There's going to be Earth observation and environmental data, meteorological information, statistics, companies and company ownership, so the kind of information you can find in company registers, and information on mobility. The draft regulation is in fact ready. We will be soon launching a public consultation on it, so stay tuned to the European Commission's website, the Have Your Say website, where we will soon publish it for comments, for suggestions, for feedback. Voila, I think this is where I will stop, and I will hand over to my colleague Daniele.
Hello, thank you, Simon, and good afternoon, everybody. So I will take over from this point. So how to put in practice all this strategy, which is built on 2 components: the legal components, legal acts, which create some obligations, some ways for in this case sharing data in an optimal way. But we also need the tools, and we also need something maybe more technical or instruments to put this in practice. Before going to what we will do in the future, maybe just one word on what we have done so far. Not only this, but just one of the components of our data strategy, which is not born, of course, this year, but we are now going to a certain scaling up and broadening it a lot. But so far, there are already some instruments available, and the first thing that we thought had to be addressed since a long time is how to discover data. We want to make available more and more data, but there are already a lot of data available out there. How to know which data are available and what is their content. So I mentioned here two instruments that have been set up within 2 similar policies, one specific to the environment and to geospatial, which is what you know very well, the Inspire GeoPortal, which is embedded into the Inspire Directive, and is a way of showing and making available a catalog of all geospatial data made available by member states under the Inspire Directive. And another component, which is more under the Open Data Directive, but which does basically the same thing, but in a more cross-domain way, is a catalog, so a portal making available data sets which have been generated by European public administrations under the old public sector information, now Open Data Directive. So these are 2 instruments which are already out there. They are basically catalogs, a bit like Google, that you can interrogate. And they are already, I think, a good source of information and of content to be already shared. And the portal that you can see on the left, the European data portal, now called data.europa.eu, which collects data sets from all European public administrations and European institutions and bodies, is now a few days ago was displaying and referencing more than 1,300,000 data sets. But of course, this is not enough. And if we go to the next slide, we can now enter into the concept that has been introduced by the data strategy, this concept of data space. So to facilitate the exchange of data, now we were before thinking more in terms of discovering data, but that's not enough. We need also to exchange data. So the data space is a concept which is made concrete with some technical and non-technical measures, but it is basically first of all a place where which contains and puts together an IT infrastructure to share data, because you need to a place where data can be exchanged, stored, and so on. We need also data governance, as also Shimon underlined, so rules which show in which way this data can be exchanged and create trust from both sides of the market, let's say. Trust for those who make data available and trust in those who reuse data. So data holders, or those who make available data, should be in control of what they make available, and those who reuse should know exactly what they can do with data they can reuse. If you go to the next slide. Yes, so this is a bit complex, but this is just to show you that data spaces, and we will see also in another slide, belong to an overall way of trying to implement this data strategy in technical and non-technical terms, which is basically having this sort of matrix where we have on one hand, data spaces related to a certain number of key or priority domains, which were named in the data strategy communication. The Green Deal is one of them, the one which is shown there. So first of all, the idea is that we should have domain-related data spaces where data are easily exchangeable within the data space, because of course interoperability should first of all be achieved within a single domain. It's easier sometimes, maybe most rules are already out there. In the case of geospatial environmental data, Inspire is basically already out there to define which kind of data model to be used. In other domains, maybe it is less advanced, but each of these, let's say, vertical data spaces deal with a specific domain. So this is the first step. Then, of course, we need a second step, which is creating, ideally and in some time, a sort of unique European data space, because if the first step is being able to share easily data within a certain domain, the next step is to be able to share data across domains. Because for sure, even for any kind of application, or for most of them, you need to reuse data which come from more than one domain. If you address environmental issues, not only you need data related directly to environment, but you also need data coming from the mobility sector, from the health sector, and so on. I won't elaborate too much this slide, but you can give a look later maybe, because this is the way in which we want to implement everything in a way, through a program which is called Digital Europe. If you go to the next slide, we drill in a bit more, and maybe it will be a bit more clear. So these are again the priority domains that have been defined in the communication on the data strategy for the data spaces. It's again these 9 or 10 domains. And what is, I think, important to understand or to say is that The data spaces are places where data can be exchanged, and to support this exchange, we also need something else. We need a technical infrastructure, so a European cloud, computing capability, because some of these data are big data, are data which are generated by sensors. So it's a huge amount of data which need high performance computing to derive information through AI applications, for example. And addressing the issue of guaranteeing or making as much as possible easy the exchange of data, not only within each of these data spaces, but also across them. What we want to do is to set up what is called there a data spaces support center. So again, something which is a mix of technical and legal, in this case, not legal acts, but legal recommendation, for example, to provide each of those domain-related data spaces with a sort of common layer. For example, providing recommended clauses to create licenses associated to data, which are all the same or similar across the whole domain, so that a data user who would like to get data from environment and energy and health can rely or can see that licenses associated with those data are very similar and can be compared, and it's easy to mix data from the reuse perspective. Of course, there is also the other, maybe a bit more evident, but also not easy issue of making this data interoperable from a technical point of view. So having data which share similar models, which share the same vocabularies or the same way of defining things, so that this data again can be shared more easily, not only within a domain, but across domains. If you go to the next slide, we can see another picture, again a bit more simple, where you can see the sectoral data spaces in the right place of the slide. On the left, the technical framework. So what we would want also to support in terms of setting up high performance computing capabilities and cloud resources based on European resources. And in the middle, we have this data space support center, which should create a sort of glue and put together what on one hand is sectoral data spaces, so spaces where data can be exchanged, and on the other hand, the tools necessary to make this exchange easy. Next slide. Well, one example of what we are going to support, addressing the environmental issues and taking profit of data spaces in terms of data content, but computing capabilities and storing capabilities. What you certainly know, the Destination Earth project, so creating digital models of the Earth, digital twins. Basically, models of the Earth or part of the behavior of the Earth, so that there can be virtual experimentation on what could happen if, I don't know, there is 1 or 2 degrees increase in the temperature in the next 10 years, or something that I cannot say much because I'm not an expert in this field. But the idea here is to show how the capability that we want to implement through the data spaces, through the cloud, European cloud, and through the support center should help something like this initiative, which is, of course, clearly related to environment. My next slide, and maybe that's
Daniele, you have just 2 minutes to close.
Yes, I'm over. So what is next? Yeah, no, you can go to the next slide. So what is next now? Shimon already said that this Data Act should be adopted sometime, at least as a proposal, toward the end of this year. Several funding programs have been adopted, and the work programs are being developed and adopted in the coming months. So there is the Recovery Fund, which is now addresses individual countries, but has to reserve at least 20% of the funding to digital. There is the Digital Europe program, the Horizon Europe, and the Connecting Europe Facility program as well. So all this is starting now in 2021 for the 7 years period, 2021 to 2027. The Common European Grid Data Space is, in a way, a subset of this, supported by this funding mechanism. There is the review of INSPIRE, which is ongoing, and environmental reporting, which is also one of the traditional aspects that at the EU level is used to collect the data. And the last slide, which is the next one. Yes, so a few conclusions. So I think the main message here is that what we want to achieve together, not only with a top-down approach from the European Union to the rest of Europe, but together is to build trust in data sharing. So data is a powerful way of helping the European economy, and not only, and also solving social and economic and environmental aspects, and building trust in this data sharing is our main objective. And all this depends, all the other points in a way are subset of this, and so trust is also built on the fact that we are sure that personal data are not misused, but at the same time we need to reuse also personal data. Public sector information is an important component because this is a long-lasting policy of the Commission to make available data which are already anyway generated by public bodies and should be shared as much as possible. And well, of course, we are all aware that data is essential for the green transition.